Welcome to today's webinar, Making Room for Employment Best Practices, Lessons Learned from Agencies. I am so excited to be able to share with you some of the information that we have learned over a 5-year process of working with agencies that have actually implemented best practices by doing. The overview of the projects which occurred in the South and West involved competency-based training, technical assistance, and side-by-side mentoring utilizing employment best practices. Leadership from state organizations that had the mission and vision to help increase the employment rate of individuals with disabilities, such as IDD organizations, mental health or behavioral health organizations, vocational rehabilitation, the American Job Centers, Medicaid, were a part of the collaborative that helped formulate how we would move forward as we implemented this project. Additionally, many of the states used a specific 3-phase policy analysis, which I'll share more about. The development of a replicable, cost-effective model for employment initiatives that breaks down barriers was the goal. New sources of funding was leveraged through community connections, grants, increased use of work incentives, and other braided funding strategies, and we'll talk more about that later in today's webinar. And in one state, we actually developed a systems change replication manual. To explain further the 3-phase policy analysis that I mentioned, it simply consisted of development of a statewide leadership collaborative of those organizations that have increasing the employment rate for individuals with disabilities as their mission and vision. Phase 1 was policy analysis and review for change to incorporate best practices. Policy development, where the actual policies were changed to reflect the impact of best practices, and then policy implementation. In many cases, it was a competitive process to be a part of the initiative. So there was a Memorandum of Understanding. The participants in the project had to agree to develop person-centered support teams. The work that we do, as we'll talk later, has to be a team-based model. They also had to commit to supporting a minimum number of job seekers to become employed. They had to agree to utilize employment best practices, methodology, and also they had to agree to utilize community connections to create opportunities for job seekers to become employed. So under the training and technical assistance phase that was provided, we utilized a competency-based training model. Knowledge transfer was the goal. It involved pre- and post-testing with a minimal score on the post-test to achieve the accreditation. And it's important to note, by requiring competency-based trainings, the aim is to improve not only the quality of employment services for people with disabilities, but to additionally raise the national service delivery standard. Under the technical assistance piece, it's important to note that performance improvement was the goal, and we utilized metrics such as tracking fidelity to the methodology of best practices, development of collaboratives to achieve goals, expanding new funding sources, utilizing agency and board social capital, an increase in time in community building, and we'll talk more about what that looked like, increased use of work incentives, and that policy, procedures, and HR practices had to be revised to incorporate the best practices, methodologies, and expectations. The delivery method was immersion, and by that we mean interactive curriculums, real-life experiences and scenarios, practicing the new skills learned, field work, side-by-side mentoring with a subject matter expert as the team or the employment specialist worked with a job seeker. And we also used adult learning theory, and again, we'll pick back up on what that means as well. We also required that outcomes be tracked, such as the number of job seekers who became employed, the types of jobs that they became employed in, work hours, benefits, pay, and development of natural supports. And providing a roadmap through these training and technical assistance processes, we were able to continually focus on the process of quality improvement. It's critical to recognize that adults learn very differently than what we think about as children, teenagers, or a school-based model of training. Malcolm Knowles is the father of adult learning theory, and these are the components of his theory that we incorporate in the way that we work with providers and other individuals involved in the training, such as advocates, job seekers, families, champions, anyone interested in learning more about how we can increase the employment rate of individuals with disabilities through effective training. So for adults, it's important that they understand why the information is being taught. Learning is task-oriented, not lecture. Content is relevant to their life or work. The learning process is less formal with opportunities for active participation. Learners are respected as equal partners in the process of learning. And socialization has to be a part of the process of learning. We also know from the work that we've been doing that practice is critical. We often don't think about that in the work we do with human services. In other areas, doctors, lawyers, sports figures, hair salon trainees, and I could go on, but I think you get the point. Practice before they get in real life situations to do the work. And we don't think about that. And it's critical that as we are teaching individuals new skill sets, that they have the opportunity to practice. So we think about individuals, and this is critical, who receive training achieve higher quality outcomes when time is allotted for practice, utilizing the methodology learned under the supervision of subject matter experts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later as well. And individuals who receive training without side-by-side mentoring tend to interpret what they hear in the training based on their own lived and work experience. And the cautionary tale tied to that is that there may be issues around fidelity to the process or truly understanding what is learned in a classroom setting and how that looks in real life situations may be the point at which the individual needs greater support. Additionally, critical to learning around the notion of practice, observation and critique by a mentor of the learner's performance as they utilize the methodology taught is critical, so they get immediate feedback. Structured opportunities for peer practice and critique is also critical because the work of best practices requires a team-based model. And then use of scenarios to practice with coworkers, family, their organization's HR department, where the participant works, friends, those safe places and safe people where you can practice and they can critique also helps improve skills. The model of training requires a minimum of 40 hours, and this includes both classroom work and community-based field work, and all of this is still under the umbrella of training. During the classroom work, we utilize learning labs, so there's demonstration of the methodology being taught, practice by the participants, observation, and then debriefing or critique. And it's all a team-based process. I just can't stress enough that for best practices to be effective, it has to be under a team-based process and not in isolation. So we spend time training and developing successful work teams. In a team-oriented environment, the individuals contribute to the overall success of the organization and work with fellow employees to produce quality outcomes. Even though the particular employee has a specific job function and may belong to a specific department in the organization, there is a unity and a cohesion with other co-workers to accomplish the overall objectives. So the whole goal is to work together in a cohesive manner to improve services and supports for individuals. Under the next heading, where I point out community fieldwork, community-based learning and practice, this is still under the training format of what we know creates better outcomes. So under the tutelage of a subject matter expert, we go now into the community to practice what we have been learning in the classroom setting. And we focus on informational interviews as one of those methodologies that can be so powerful. And we can use it in one of two ways. During the discovery process, as the job seeker is identifying and emerging vocational themes are beginning to materialize, we can use informational interviews to meet with individuals who work in the particular field of interest of the job seeker. It's an information-seeking process where the job seeker can learn more about what's it like to work in that particular field or that particular type of work. The second way we use informational interviews is to get to know the businesses and the business needs that may then lead to opportunities to negotiate job opportunities to meet the business's needs. Additionally, under the training format, we practice how we go through the process of assessing a business's needs. That includes questions like, what are you most proud of? What's not getting done? What's keeping you awake at night? What product or service would you like to expand into? And utilizing those questions, we're able to get to those areas that might offer opportunities to create ways to meet the needs of a business and match well a job seeker who can help that organization, that business, become more effective and efficient. We also learn about business culture. This is critical because many times we think if we have identified the job seeker's interest, preferences, accommodation needs, ideal conditions to be successful, all those things that help us understand who this individual is, we forget to think about sometimes what type of culture would the person be best suited for. If someone likes to work very independently and they can do the job task and their interests are tied to what the business needs, but they're not a good fit for the fact that maybe the business is very family-oriented, then we're setting them up for failure just as much as if we had not identified well what the tasks are that the individual has an interest in. The other piece during the field work in a particular location in the South, I love that the participants came back after doing the field work and identified in the particular culture of one of the businesses that they did the informational interview with is the example of the bulletin board. And I'm quoting from the participant. There's a bulletin board that is updated daily and is where everyone checks first thing when they arrive at work. This is important as one of the cultural practices of the business and ties to opportunities to fade supports and build natural supports. So any opportunity where the individual with a disability has become employed, that they can be in the same space with coworkers, that creates opportunities to build those bridges to shift from the employment specialist providing supports to those natural supports in the work setting that we all depend on. That insight would not have occurred without the participant actually practicing and experiencing what these methodologies look like in the real world and being able to debrief. So that was a moment of learning for everybody that is so critical. Field work also has to involve building community. And by building community, we look for those opportunities to connect with others around interest. Examples are community gardens, topical clubs, festivals, crafts, arts, music appreciation, cars, musical concerts, activism, green spaces and environmental causes, and urban farming. So whatever the interest that the job seeker has, there are so many opportunities, and I suggest using Google to look at where in the community are people meeting who have that particular interest, and helping the job seeker being in those spaces over and over creates the opportunity for those relationships to form. And if you are bonding around a similar interest, you already are a step ahead of the process of being able to create those connections and relationships in the community. Also, building community has to include the work that we do. We have to go to those civic and community opportunities where individuals who are interested in economic development and increasing the employment rate in communities, we've got to also be in those spaces around the work that we do so that we can begin to develop those networks and those bonds of trust and relationships. So it's not just building community around a job seeker and their particular interest, and that's critical, but also it's critical for you to be able to build those community connections around the work that we do to increase the employment rate of individuals with disabilities being part of the workforce. And you can't talk about community building without recognizing social capital. And I'm quoting from Robert Putnam's Better Together. The positive effects of social capital, people and relationships can reach goals that would have been far beyond the grasp of individuals in isolation. And social capital involves doing for others and others doing for you. That's how we move through life. We are social beings, and it takes us helping one another to have a quality life, to work through those hard times, and to create those opportunities for the kind of quality life we want. And after each community-based activity that we do together for individuals to practice, as well as opportunities for individuals to observe the work from a subject matter expert, we always debrief what worked, what didn't work, what are the strengths that the individuals involved feel that they had, what are the areas that they would like more support to shift challenges to strengths. And that completes the classroom and the community-based fieldwork training and culminates in the post-test. And for those individuals who achieve the minimal score, achieve the certificate. So phase 2, and this is the piece that's critical. We begin to work side by side in this particular model with the employment specialists who are part of the project and job seekers. And this is the exciting, fun part of the work that we get to do. And it begins with a conversation with the job seeker, the family, and their significant other, to explain how we're going to move forward to help them become employed. And each one of the stages of the work that we do, utilizing employment best practices, is done with the employment specialist, the team, and the job seeker. And that's that aspect of this particular model that I was referencing earlier. When individuals don't then translate the knowledge learned during the classroom activity and the fieldwork in the community during that training period that results in the post-testing, there can be disconnects between how that individual implements best practices in the community if they don't have that mentor to lead them through that process. So during the home visits, we go together. The purpose of course, today is not to go into great detail about how these various methodologies are implemented. It's to give the overall view of what the lessons learned are based on the agencies that chose to begin to implement, to begin to take action around the work we do. We also work together around familiar activities, those activities that the job seeker loves to do, because that helps us get to know who the person is at their best. We work together to identify individually based community activities identified as those activities the person would like to do but has never done. This helps us see not only what interest the person may have when they get in the real world and talk to folks who do this work, but also what does it look like when the individual may not know what to expect? What might be some stressors and additional strengths regarding the person handling unfamiliar experiences, because that can tie back into how we support the person in a job. And then at that point, we are beginning to synthesize and analyze information for emerging vocational themes, and we begin to talk to those folks who do the work in those particular job settings. What distinguishes this model from the labor market approach? And of course, the labor market approach is based on those traditional ways that we have helped people become employed. Those jobs that have openings or vacancies, ads, tapping into how organizations recruit, jobs that we hear about, and it usually involves an application, an interview with an HR representative. And we know that that approach, because it is a competitive approach, leaves many individuals out who have the greatest impact of disability. And we need all individuals working. So we think of the work under the best practices model as an economic development model. So for folks who can participate well in a competitive model, then the labor market approach is a great model for many people. The economic development model works for individuals who would not have an opportunity to compete in those traditional approaches. And we miss out on a group of individuals, those of us who have disabilities, those of us who have the greatest impact of disability. And they have so much to offer. We have so much to offer to solving the needs of businesses. So the economic development model creates opportunities that did not exist, because we get into the work with small business owners of identifying what are their needs and how can we help solve them. It involves community exploration to understand business owner needs, as I just reiterated. Job negotiation is mutually beneficial to the job seeker and the employer, and we utilize social capital and community connections. Depending on the statistics, in the world of work generally, over 60% of jobs come about because someone knew someone. They utilize their social connections. So this is not a foreign concept. I just want to give a couple of examples to demonstrate how to think about the work we do differently under this model. During one of the informational interviews, we were able to meet with this lovely business owner, Michelle Salon and Spa. Michelle is her daughter, and they work together. And so when we began to talk about the business, and the point was not to go in and say, are you hiring? Do you have openings? That leads nowhere in the approach that we're talking about. Our goal was not for an ask. Our goal was to learn about the business. And much like discovery, we spend time in the community connecting with businesses to get to know them just as intimately as we get to know job seekers, because it takes knowing the small business owner and the job seeker to be able to match them well. So with Michelle, when we began talking to her about her business, she had just opened it and she was in desperate need of receptionists because she was trying to do all those tasks. So she's in the middle of working with a customer and the phone's ringing. She had to answer it because she's trying to grow our customer base. So not only did she share that she would like to hire someone who's a good match for her business as a receptionist, but the added value was that she wanted to offer the opportunity for the individual to learn more about the salon and spa business so that that individual would have an opportunity for a career path. The other aspect that we often overlook is many businesses have diversity goals. They want to have employees that really represent citizens in the community. And so with this particular individual, he owns an insurance company. And when we talked to him about what innovation, what improvement he wanted to make to his particular business, was he wanted to increase the diversity of the staff. He wanted folks who could represent well the beautiful diversity in the community. So many times, one of the aspects of being able to meet the needs of a business is that they have diversity goals, and sometimes we don't think about that. I love Richard Branson, and he was interviewed in the Harvard Business Review, and he talks about career success. This is how he hires, and it beautifully fits with a 21st century work evolution of doing business in a way that is not, a traditional model that maybe our parents and grandparents followed. He hires based on considering life experience. What we learn as we move through life is critical. He could care less about a person's degree. He hires on personality. And there are some great interviews that you can find on YouTube. Richard Branson has dyslexia, and he knew that he needed folks who could help him do those aspects of his business that weren't his strengths, which then freed him up because he's brilliant in terms of innovation, thinking about systems. And so he actually establishes his business utilizing a customized employment model, finding the good people who can do the work with the skill sets that are their strengths, identifying the needs he has for folks to support him in those areas that he has a learning disability that impacts aspects of the components of his work. And again, freeing him up for that innovative, overall systemic brilliance that he brings to his work. So the way that he works is just a great example of the work that we do in employment best practices. And of course, many of the methodologies that we use came out of progressive business models. And at this point, we have moved through job negotiation, developed employment proposals after those initial conversations with small business owners, talking about the needs that they have, matching well someone who can meet those needs and is a good fit for the culture, and our celebrating the fact that we are increasing the number of citizens with the greatest impact of disabilities to become employed. So I want to now talk about having given you that grounding in how this model works. What are some of the practical wisdom and guidelines that together as agencies we want to highlight? So one thing that became very clear as we debriefed on projects and looked at lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work, what stood out was that staff have become community builders using person-centered planning to be successful. And this involves assisting an individual with identifying their interest, helping them identify how to participate and contribute to their community, and having meaningful community roles and relationships. And this is no different than what any of us want. And I think sometimes when we keep ourselves bound by a disability model, we lose sight of the fact that we all want the same things for quality life: relationships, valued roles, work, involvement in the community based on our interests when we're not working, safe places to live. So I think it's important to recognize that we're all one. We move through life differently. We have different challenges. We have different barriers. But we can creatively figure out how, with best practices, to create opportunities for individuals with support and accommodation as needed to be a part of the workforce and have a working life. Communities are stronger and better when everybody has a valued role, and work is part of that. Another practical wisdom and guideline that's important is social involvement. Social participation equals social engagement. To be able to be a part of the community and participate in the community and find those opportunities around those common interests, we have to get out of buildings, facilities, traditional disability systems, and look at the community as where the good work happens, where we're able to achieve those outcomes. We have to seek out those opportunities to connect with community and civic committees and organizations in the work we do to build business connections. We have to have a presence, we have to build trust, and we have to bond with those businesses and organizations that also are tied to increasing the employment rate of communities and being able to help support and advocate for everyone to have a working life. Social capital has to be a part of it. Investing in social relationships and the value of these relationships to do for each other. It's a give and take. And to build partnerships and capitalize on those relationships and networks to achieve outcomes. But it can't be one-sided. It can't be we go into the business world and just ask, can you help get this person become employed, or a pity model, you'll be a better person for hiring this person. That devalues and demeans the contributions that folks with individuals with disabilities can make to becoming effective members of the workforce. Community organizations that can work together to achieve goals. This creates the context for how we develop employment differently. Working collaboratively with job seekers, families, champions, change agents, advocates, Politicians, vocational rehabilitation services, the American Job Centers, or one-stops, as we also call them, providers, school systems, any network that can support individuals' goals to achieve the outcomes of employment are vital to collaborate with. And to look at how can we move past those traditional funding systems to more creative ways of thinking about the community. The power of grants, looking for opportunities. Microloans. Some organizations have branched out and with flexible dollars or donated dollars that the organization may receive to provide short-term loans to the job seekers they're working with. So they have additional funding to help them achieve their employment goal. ITAs and IDAs, past plans. Many times families and individuals have contributions that they can make either in matching funds or they may have resources that they can pull into achieving the outcomes. Churches, community businesses, civic and community organizations. And it's important to know that donated funds often have a flexibility that some of the more traditional funds don't have and can be richer sources of financial support and being able to do more creative ways of helping the person to achieve their employment goal. We have to work in collaboration and develop strong bonds of trust with the American Job Centers and the WIOA changes that only make us stronger in terms of working together collaboratively across systems. Micro-enterprise centers, chambers of commerce, economic development centers. And we have to look at how we can braid these resources together to integrate as many opportunities to help the person meet their employment needs and to map how each resource can support those larger goals. Lessons learned. This has been one of the most powerful aspects of some of the trends that we began to pick up on over the 5 years that we began to look at this model and collect both anecdotal and some actual data around emerging approaches that create better outcomes. One issue that I'm sure many of us can relate to is that sometimes people are a part of such an initiative, but things happen and they get called away. So there's this inconsistency and disconnect between the individual participating in all aspects of systems change initiatives, utilizing best practices in the model that I previously went through when we began this webinar. So we know that leadership must ensure staff are able to participate and make it a priority, protecting their time to attend these trainings. They also need to make sure that there's a recognition that being able to practice what is being learned before the individual gets into real-life situations past the sustainability piece, once the classroom, the field work, and then the side-by-side mentoring is completed. The practicing needs to continue because that's how folks learn and grow and become better. Leadership must strategically integrate the competencies, the methodology, the expectations of incorporating best practices into the organization, into the policies and practices. It has to be part of daily expectations of staff. and also needs to be added to the annual reviews that organizations complete on employees. We also know that leadership need to be supported as they begin to shift to best practices. So it's important to support organizations and leadership as they develop those strategic plans. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We can provide to organizations and leadership models that can be very, very effective, that are highly documented through a variety of sources to utilize that as part of their strategic planning. And this helps leadership then develop the ability to lead and support change as well as manage change. This is so critical because we run across this. If the organizational resources are not in place to be able to dedicate staff to be a part of the systems change effort, then the infrastructure has to be developed prior to investing resources in training. So if an organization begins to just involve staff in available trainings, but they have not done the work strategically to develop their infrastructure so that when staff have the skill sets to begin building capacity in the organization, and there's not a structure where those individuals come back to new roles and responsibilities, it's just a waste of time. And so I want to stress that because we have experienced that during the time that this webinar is based upon. Individuals, and I just want to stress some of these points that we alluded to earlier, but individuals who receive best practices training achieve higher quality outcomes when time is allotted for practice utilizing the methodology under the supervision of subject matter experts. And that's that knowledge transfer that occurs when working in real life situations with job seekers, and it's so critical. And this ties to that. Individuals who receive training without that side-by-side mentoring tend to interpret the transfer of knowledge to practice through their own lived and work experiences. And as a result, the job performance typically fails to meet fidelity of the process and results in low quality outcomes. Building capacity is dependent upon continuing to provide best practice trainings. We just don't do the initial training and then we're done and things all move forward in a good way. It has to be, there have to be refresher courses and then also continual training formats where staff can tap into these opportunities as new individuals are hired. There needs to be a focus on Social Security work incentives. We also see that there's got to be a strong focus on grounding the work of best practices in the values such as zero exclusion and other values that we work from, self-determination, and positive behavioral supports. And people need to understand the concept of inclusion. And sometimes folks don't see how those have to be part of the basic foundation that we then move forward to focus on employment best practices. Outcome measures help us track how well we're doing as provider organizations and create performance standards that we want to reach. We hear over and over across systems the desire for common language. One organization may use a phrase that an organization may have a similar phrase, but they have totally different meanings. So we have to continue to work to identify and integrate into the various systems that collaborate a common language. So when we use a particular term, it has the same meaning for everybody. Transformation is facilitated when best practices and collaboration occur within and across systems. So we need to involve the residential component of a provider organization or organizations that provide that service so that they're a part of the planning, with organizations that may just provide the employment piece. Day programs, any employment supports and systems, the transition services through the school systems, VR workforce organizations, and any other stakeholders. The most successful and dynamic customized employment teams consist of both natural and paid supports, community leaders, community members that can assist with identifying individual employment opportunities, social capital and growing social capital, and all of that leads to good quality community-based outcomes. And as I'm wrapping up, I want to also point out how critical communities of practice can be for the sustainability solution to this work, and also to continue to support one another as the work continues in particular regions that collaborate together across all those various systems that I had mentioned earlier. So, concluding the webinar, what does it take? Looking at community differently, moving toward economic development, creating opportunities where opportunities did not exist, spending time with local businesses and in the community and less time in those traditional disability systems, collaborating around the notion of person-centered approaches that are driven by the individual's interests, preferences, strengths of an individual, not a program. Often we think about in the past that we're disability programs that happen to provide employment. That's not going to resonate in the business world. We have to redefine ourselves as employment services. We have to recognize that disability does not occur in a vacuum. It's part of the local economy. It's part of the local community. If we live long enough, we're all going to have an impact of disability. Our sensory processes, our mobility are going to change over time. So disability is natural. And also, and I want you to hear this statement in the slide that I'm going to move to conclude our time together. Recognizing that individuals with disability are the largest minority group. Those of us with disabilities have the purchasing power of 50 million strong. And I'm going to end on this. The power of purchasing and employer engagement. I'm going to read it. The Nielsen Consumer and Shopper Analytics team found that 5.5% of U.S. households have a member with intellectual disabilities, representing $31 billion in buying power annually. The team also found that 7.1% additional households have an immediate family member, parent or child, with intellectual disabilities who live outside the household, They have a $35 billion buying power. Combined, this group has $66 billion in collective annual buying power, indicating that it's a robust and important group in the U.S. consumer market. So imagine when you think about that across all disabilities, that $35 billion increases to even higher purchasing power. So I think we need to also market the fact that individuals with disabilities need to be a part of the workforce and that they are a powerful customer base that businesses need to recognize and respect and honor. So thank you for your time. There will be opportunities for questions. And this concludes the webinar. And I hope it's been beneficial. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to share those so that we can have continued discussion of the information that I presented today. Thank you.